Welcome to Tales from the Bridge. This is the second half of the conversation we had with Richard Morgan and Peter Watts. These are two of our favorite authors, so we're definitely going to have them back on the show at some point down the road. If you're just joining us for the first or second time, go back and check out conversations we've had with Richard and Peter and other authors. We've had a lot of great guests on the show. We talk about books, movies, and stuff all the time, so go back and check out older episodes. If you have not liked, subscribed, followed, left us a review, we'd love to hear from you. All right, we're not going to let anyone wait too long for this. Let's make our way over to the bridge. Do you think that having children is the cause for optimism in many of us then? And
it's a really interesting question. And I the moment it sort of dawned on me, holy shit, you only care about the environment once you've destroyed it. It made me wonder, is this why I'm giving up? But I don't know if I have given up. I do walk the walk, right? I haven't had kids. I don't own a car, never have owned a car. Don't eat meat very often, like maybe, red meat once a year sort of thing. So I'm generally vegetarian. I lived in the equivalent of a one-bedroom apartment until I was like 52 years old. And when I moved into this wonderful little place, it was, with 3 other people. So my personal impact has been pretty low. You're asking me about my opinion, right? My personal feelings of hope. But what I'm saying is my actions have been far more sustainable than most people. It's true that I will occasionally fly across the Atlantic and wag my finger at people about their carbon footprint. But if you actually look at the carbon impact of having even a single child in the first world, again, these are totally first world statistics. The annual carbon impact of having a child is like an order of magnitude more than I could fly back and forth across the Atlantic every week of the year and still not have as much of a carbon impact as I would have by having just a single child.
And you know what's funny about that, Peter, is you can tell people that till you're blue in the face, and it isn't going to change your behavior, right?
No. But my point is my behavior is kind of consistent, right?
Right.
So I wonder about asking me, whether I would be more or less optimistic, when in fact I'm already doing more than 90% of them. Greta Thunberg can certainly kick my ass, but most of the people in the third world, I'm more righteous than, even though I don't have hope. Not having hope, having given up on humanity, doesn't mean that I don't still do the things that I can to reduce impact. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
But you can do it another way too, and this is something, Richard, I believe actually we talked about this when you were last on the show, is how storytelling can be an opportunity for changing hearts and minds, right? So you can tell a story about this and almost sideload ideas into people's heads without them knowing that their delusional beliefs are being questioned. You can insert assumptions, or you can modify assumptions strategically through storytelling. And I don't know if you guys have ever thought about that explicitly, that I could try to convince somebody of something by telling it to them through story.
That's true, but only on a conglomerate scale. So the last time a single book had that kind of impact, a fictional book, it's probably Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? Single books don't have those kind of impacts in the world. Every now and then you'll get something like Silent Spring, which, but that's non-fiction. That's akin to an action, if you like. But I think what does happen is, I think that a body of literature builds a set of assumptions. So for example, if I were to write a novel now along the lines of what was the spoof Nazi thing, The Iron Dream, was it?
Yeah.
I remember reading, it's this one where Adolf Hitler is the hero of a golden age science fiction story, basically.
Is it? Oh, Norman
Taika
Spinrad.
Waititi's film? Taika Waititi, is that his film?
No. This
No,
was
no, no.
this
This
was
is
another.
a book by Norman Spinrad. Came out in like the late 60s.
No,
early
no, it's not. No, it's not the Spinrad one. It's before that. There was another one written way back in the, and I think it was written, if not Golden Age, then shortly after. And it's not Spinrad, because Spinrad's is Spinrad's the Iron Dream? I can't remember.
It's called The Iron Dream, yeah. Pretty sure.
Okay, right. So it's not that one. There's another one, and it is literally the story of Adolf Hitler. Maybe it is Spinrad. I can't remember. I read it. I picked it up in a secondhand bookshop when I was like in my teens or something. And it starts with this character, sort of. He lands at a spaceport, and it goes on about how he stays away from the the sort of the underhumans, and it's. The thing is, if I were to sit down now and to write a science fiction novel that had that kind of a protagonist and a sort of this belief in the superiority of say the white race or whatever, I couldn't get a hearing for that. I mean, it wouldn't, maybe in Russia, but no one will publish that because, and it's not some kind of big conspiracy, it's simply because the body of Western literature has moved to a point where that is just not tenable. And I think bodies of literature can have an impact. A body of literature can push forward an agenda that is humanist, for example, or compassionate, which is the body of Western literature has been pushing compassion, for a while now. So I do think that that's possible. I don't think any single book. I've never kidded myself that anything I've ever written will have a splash impact that will affect people at a societal level.
That said, though, on an individual level,
but
I owe my career both as a marine biologist and as a science fiction writer to two books, one nonfiction, one fiction. The fiction being John Brunner's The Sheep Look Up.
Good choice.
I read that and it was like, holy fuck, I have to do something. And I am not society. I am just one doofus that nobody pays any attention to. But fiction did on that basis. Like here's a case in point where a profoundly pessimistic novel actually activated something in me, changed the course of my professional life. As a biologist, I worked on conservation issues. Obviously, I stridently shriek about environmental degradation in all of my fiction. Whether it has an impact, I don't know. But it has given me a profound skepticism of people like Del Toro, who sort of go on a Time magazine and say, the most radical thing you can do is be optimistic. And people like Michael Mann, who say, no matter how bad the facts are, you can't let people, buy into a paralyzing narrative of hopelessness and despair. And I don't think, there are neurological circuits that keep us from actually internalizing on a gut level the fact that we're going to die. They have found these things. They have, stuck people in MRIs. They've shown them like these little subliminal cues about we can totally internalize other people are going to die. But when we're showing recognizable suggestions that there's something that throws our brains into cognitive neutral. Even if we think like this great Reddit quote that I've never been able to track down who said it, but it was like, everybody thinks they're going to be Mad Max. Nobody thinks they're going to be one of the skulls piled up in the background.
Yes.
We are delusionally optimistic.
Yeah.
There is study after study that shows that the only people that are truly objective are the people that we call clinically depressed.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty telling that those people who are most objective, who can most clearly see the situation as it is, are those that we tar as victims of a pathology. I don't think the problem is that we are too depressed and we are too scared and we have become helpless. I think the problem is that we are not scared enough. I think the problem is that we are still in denial. If you look out your window and you see an avalanche heading for your front room, do you curl up into a ball and wait to die and say, oh, I guess, or do you run like hell? If you're truly terrified, you act. And I think the hope police are pernicious. I think that they feed into they don't feed into a paralyzing narrative of hopelessness and despair. as Mann put it. But what they do is they feed into a paralyzing narrative of, oh, we'll muddle through somehow. We always have. And when you've got somebody like Kim Stanley Robinson, who has is world famous as the exemplar of intelligent, considered optimism, when he says that the most he can do, when the closest he can now come to an optimistic ending, is that we barely avoid an extinction level event, but everything else turns to shit. I think that's telling.
People just would rather choose happiness over sadness, or, I mean, despair doesn't feel good, and
Well, I
even
think
if we're
it's
in
But why does it
denial.
have to be despair? Why can't it be anger? Why can't it be motivation? I mean, our literature is absolutely fucking full of stories where people are activated by rage and the desire to revenge. Like the Star Is My Destination, Alfred Bester. I read that when I was 9 years old, which maybe might have been too early. I don't know. But the idea that somebody can be activated, and I know, there are certainly people that I knew in the fifth grade that I would gladly beat to a pulp if I ran into them today. Anger is I think anger is a powerful motivator.
Yes, it's an
You
energy.
should know this, Richard. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think you've
Anger's
written a
one
happy
of my
page of prose
favorites.
in your life.
No. I mean, but I think. I mean, you know what? When all is said and done, I'm living in the countryside now, which is not something I ever saw myself doing. We've just happened to have ended up here, partly because we couldn't afford to live any closer into town, partly because my wife suddenly, I mean, she's always had a thing for gardens, and one thing or another, we end up with what is essentially like an old farm with about an acre of ground around it. And it's really nice. I mean, when I say we're in the countryside, it's not like we have to drive very far to not be, but we are in the countryside. But I mean, one of the things that you get from living in the countryside is how unbelievably fucking brutal and pitiless nature as a mechanism is. Death is all around you. You see, pointless death, stupid death, living things dying left, right, and center, and also the whole thing of lots and lots of life being created because the calculus is that, well, a lot of this isn't going to make it, so let's produce 150 of these little cuddly baby rabbits because, well, 70 at least are going to end up dead in some shape or form. I think it's made me think quite seriously about it's like, well, you know what, we are just this fucking sort of overclocked ape species that lucked into this huge brain, and I kind of feel that we've not done badly. It's only really been, it's less than 100 years since we realized that we're our own worst enemies, that actually our problems are not external monsters. They are the things that have to be vanquished within ourselves and within our societies. You only have to go back to this era that I've written about. You only have to go back to the end of the Victorian era. Everyone still believed, mastery of man over nature. Everything's going to be glorious because we're going to keep inventing all this cool stuff, and we'll conquer the limits of our universe. We'll advance. We'll do this. We'll do that. I mean, that's carried us from the African savannah, basically, increasingly sophisticated iterations of thought. And it really is a very short amount of time, less than 100 years, to wake up and go, fuck, it's us. We're the problem. And to try and take a million, or, well, no, more than that. I mean, what's his name? That idiot, what's his name? Jordan Peterson, going on about lobsters and how lobsters have a hierarchy, endocrine system. They are hierarchical as creatures, and it's wired into how they behave. And, that's like our diversion from their ancestors is like a 500 million years ago or something. So, you've got 500 million years or more of fight, fuck, survive, or survive, fight, fuck. That's it. That's the whole purpose of things. And I think yeah, people behave stupidly, but it's because we're not evolved for this. We're not evolved for the circumstances we're in. And as the rate of technological change has accelerated in the last 100 years, we've become increasingly ill-suited to our context. So I'm not as angry as Peter is, I think, because I kind of feel like, yeah, we're fucking up here, but honestly, all things considered, we've made a halfway decent fist of this, and somebody has come and upended the board in the middle of the game, and said, no, new rules, and we aren't, you can't evolve fast enough to do that. It's very hard to rejig everything that your organism is designed to do and go, no, that isn't the path, because that's doom. We have to find a different way to operate. So I'm more forgiving maybe of the species. I think we've made a good fist of saying fuck off to an uncaring universe. You say, fuck you, we will care. Fuck you, we will nurture, we will protect the weak, we will make sure that beings who would have just been snuffed out because of their varying failures or bad luck, even, we'll fight that. We'll try to ensure that doesn't happen. That's not a bad CV, is it? I think. And now, we're faced with this massive challenge, and it's the biggest challenge that any species could face, because it's the ability to look in the mirror and go, there's the problem, which segueing quickly into something less dreary is why I am a noir and I guess post-cyberpunk writer, because I think that one of the big things with noir as a tradition in storytelling is it is all about that. It's all about the look in the mirror.
So if we're driven by delusion and we're evolutionarily not prepared to run our society, in a way that's sustainable, what's the solution? Is it genetic engineering? Is it benevolent AI? Or is it there is no solution?
Well, I think, again, I don't know if this makes me an optimist or a fatalist or what, to be honest, but I kind of feel that these solutions are inbuilt, because what is going to happen, I think Peter's not wrong. What's going to happen is we are going to see some catastrophic failures. But I think then what will happen is there will be a response, and it'll be a crisis response. Now, it won't be pretty. I think there are going to be a lot of dead people, and we are going to be doing a lot of the killing. I think, one of the things that I've believed politically for at least the last 10 years is that in places like the Northern America and continental America, Northern America, and in Western Europe, we've got to have a very serious discussion about what immigration is and what we want it to be and what it can be. Because, unfortunately, I don't know how it is in Canada and America. I suspect it's probably similar, to be honest. But here, you only really are given, if you want to talk about immigration, you only really are allowed to stand in two places. One place is to say, fuck those immigrants, send them back. And the other place you're allowed to stand is to say, oh my God, those poor people, we must take them in, right? Neither of those are desirable or tenable. If you were to calculate the number of people in sub-Saharan Africa who are having a really shitty time of it and would really like to be able to give their children Western standards of life, even Western standards of life at the lower end of society, that runs into tens of millions of people. And that's just sub-Saharan Africa. So the question then arises, so what do? Do we say anyone who's having a shitty time, you're welcome here? That's impossible. Societally, it absolutely is not possible. So somebody is going to have to make themselves very unpopular and draw up a set of what are our operating instructions for what do we do about migration.
You kind of do have that. There are criteria for admission, right? If you but
what I mean is in the
particular
in
field.
the political conversation, what I mean is in the political conversation, what you're not seeing, or maybe we will start to see it. I think maybe, certainly the Labour Party that have just been elected here, I think you're going to start to see that emerging in their conversation, is what people on the progressive left who are prepared to say, no, look, I'm sorry, there are limits. So we'll take the people we can use, and we'll take some charity cases because we want to feel, good about ourselves as a society. But ultimately, we can't take everyone. And that is one of a whole series of very unpleasant conversations that are going to have to be had in the next 50 years. And it's going to be ugly. I can imagine, mowing them down on the fences at the borders and things. It's going to be bad. But referring to the inbuilt thing, in the same way that both world wars were pretty bad, you're going to see a response. And what will emerge from that, I don't know. I guess if you're involved in that, what you're trying to... I remember reading a fantastic short science fiction story by John Barnes, is it? Does that ring a bell? I mean, I'd never heard of him. He was a science fiction writer, John Barnes, I think. Might be wrong about the first name. And I just stumbled on this collection of short stories somewhere. Never heard of him. Never heard of him since, to be honest. But there's an interesting one that's told from the point of view of a sort of post-apocalyptic guy, and he's talking about what's going on. And one of the things he's discussing is how they're having an election. There's going to be a vote for mayor or whatever the senior position is. And one of the things they're discussing is putting bodies up on gibbets and crucifixes and things to scare people off from the territory that they've got fenced in. And he's voting for the guy who won't allow those people to be strung up alive.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. He's saying, it's fine, kill them and then put them up there. That's what we've got to hang on to something. So there's a sort of this core of decency, and how it manifests for him is this idea that, well, we don't string people up living,
Alive. Well, there's shades of gray. It's a new
but the book is sorry, the short story is called My Advice to the Civilized, because they're going on a mission, they're going on a raid or something, and he's been told by his commanding officer that he needs to write a letter to a family member in case he doesn't come back. And he said, I don't have any family, they all died in the horrible thing 3 years ago or whatever it was. So instead he writes this letter to the supposed inhabitants of a civilization that he hopes is coming, in 100 years' time or something like that. And he's going on about all the value, all the things that a civilized society has that you should really try and maximize and enjoy. And yeah, pluralism is one of those, and so and so. And then mercy comes into the conversation, and that's where we get this thing about the stringing people up thing, But I mean, yeah, slight exaggeration, but that's probably what we're looking at before the end of the century.
That's an adaptation strategy of altering our own morality. Is kind of what you're talking
about.
Well,
it will be. I mean, if we're lucky, if we're really fucking lucky, it will be a question of the normal rules don't apply right now, which is, of course, what happens in wars, right? With a sort of modicum of rules of war, decency somewhere in that mass, trying to stay afloat, and then out of that comes, I don't know, something else, and you kind of hope that what emerges from it is the sort of some coherent remnant of what we built in the Western world, rather than the sort of the authoritarian thing you're seeing in China or in Russia.
Yeah, well, maybe your point sort of leads us back to what Kevin was originally asking that we never actually answered. How do you fix it? And I mean, the problem with democracy is that it fractures and it's in system invisible by cheaters. The problem with totalitarianism is that you have the levers in the hands of people with vested interests. Perhaps the solution is to, and this is something that we might want to product test in science fiction novels before implementing it in the real world. Perhaps the solution is to give control to people who literally have, or entities that literally have no vested interest in the outcome of the system.
Didn't Kurt Vonnegut write a short story about that? Thought it was like doing your jury duty. You'd have to do your political leadership duty, and you'd show up and you'd do it for a period of time. And
I've heard that's been kicking around in the science fiction world for a while. I don't know if it was Vonnegut. I'm trying to think.
I don't know either. I mean, I've always thought.
I mean, to be honest with you, it's a lot of this has to do with it just has to do with educating. You need an educated and awake populace, and of course that's something that's not being, I mean, famously American education is down the toilet, and obviously if you're not educating your population, then it's a lot easier to fuck them over. So I think if you wanted to look at where do we start, then I think you start with education. You start with, so any government that is interested in putting a lot of money and resources into educating the next couple of generations properly, that's
I hate to invoke Heinlein at this point, and I don't know how you guys all feel about Starship Troopers, but the most interesting point that I took home from that novel was the kind of the didactic point that there's nothing about an educated, intelligent person that makes them invulnerable to corruption. In fact, the more educated, for example, more educated Republicans are just as likely to be climate change deniers, in fact, even more likely to be climate change deniers than uneducated Joe and Josephine six-packs. And the reason they do that is that they can use their education to invoke more arcane, sophisticated sounding arguments. Like Joe and Josephine six-pack are not going to say, or Joe and Josephine six-pack are just going to say, fucking communists think that it's like, it's a Chinese hoax. It's climate change is bullshit. Whereas an educated Republican is going to say, yeah, but how do you explain the disparity between ground-based stations and satellite-based stations? Huh? That's a real statistical artifact. Huh? And so you have to realize, okay, those artifactual results came from the fact that nobody took into account the fact that orbit was degrading over time. And as a result, the satellites were closer to the ground. And once you factor that in, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, education and intelligence does not necessarily aim for an altruistic or societally good outcome.
I'm not sure if we did talk about this, but I'll make a little bit of a bold statement here. Religion, I do think, has a lot to do with this denial as well. I do think that we've got billions of people that believe in religions that have a reward system after you die. And if you have a reward system after you die, you just might not care about this earth that's going to be burning hell anyway, because you've gone somewhere else.
Although I rather uncomfortably for me, because I'm a thoroughgoing lifetime atheist, rather uncomfortably for me, they've done studies in the US, and I think they found that generally speaking, religiosity seems to correlate with a whole host of like better social behavior, in that religious people seem to be more inclined to give to charity. They seem more inclined to be interested in their surrounding neighbors. There are a whole series of things where it seems that, and it's a positive feedback thing as well. Religiosity also seems to correlate quite often, quite highly, with people feeling happier generally. Feeling that their lives have purpose and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm stuck there, because you if you're me, you're going, this is a bunch of bullshit, guys. But you see the results of that. There's a very interesting book I would recommend you all read if you haven't, called Dominion. And it's by a guy called Tom Holland. He's a historian. He's written a whole bunch of really good books. They're all good. I mean, I recommend read him generally. But Dominion basically is about Christianity. It sort of walks you through the stages of development in Christianity. And what he's basically saying is that Christianity has made the modern world to an extent that we don't even really think about anymore. He thinks that pretty much everything that is good about Western society has ultimately come out of a Christian matrix, in the sense that Christianity wasn't the first religion, but it was the first Western successful religion that advocated universalism, the idea that there was no difference in the eyes of God between a slave and an emperor. It was the first religion that said that material goods are, not where it's at, and in actual fact possibly are the opposite of where it's at. There are a whole bunch of things that it did along the way culturally that have contributed to society. And what he's basically saying is, he said, growing up, I think he's an atheist as well. Growing up, he didn't really like Christianity because he found it boring compared to, say, Viking paganism, which is fun when you're a teenage kid, but what he said was, the more I read, the more I grow, the more I live, the more I realize that, like it or not, I am a Christian. Whether or not I actually believe, I am culturally a Christian, and Christianity is deep in the seams of our society in all sorts of ways, and it has been incredibly beneficial. His argument is that without Christianity, had Christianity not come to the fore over the couple of thousand years that it did, that we could still be living in, I mean, he contrasts it with the Roman Empire, which was the height of civilization at the time. Incredibly brutal, though, in its outlook. It was all about basically men, women didn't matter at all. There was no sense that women had any value. There was no sense that someone in lower class of society was in any way could anyway aspire to have the same value as someone at a higher level of society. Intensely rigid, stratified society, very brutal, very utilitarian. And he's saying, you know, these are things that Christianity has bled out of Western culture over the centuries.
I can corroborate some of that, but I also dispute a lot of it.
Well, he's not selling it as a, you know, as a panacea, but what he's saying is that he thinks that we fail to give credit where credit's due.
But just the basic claims, I'm thinking his basic claims, I question. First of all, there's no denying that religion generally has serves an adaptive function.
Yeah.
There was a study that was done of secular versus religious kibbutzes in Israel.
Yeah.
And they've also done this with sort of cults and communes and stuff in the US, and they find that all other things being equal, a religious community has a longer lifespan than a secular community, even if it's sort of set up with the same social hierarchy. And that within the religious communities, the ones that survive the longest are the Handmaid's Tale societies, the really, really strictly surveillant, God will send you to hell if he catches you masturbating, repressive types of societies. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Some of them having to do with high exit and entry costs. If you believe in kind of a mushy God that's, you know, whatever, it's all good, man. You can praise God on the golf course. You're going to have far more of a churn through than you'll get if, in order to join the club, you have to give your virgin daughter to the cult leader. People who do that are going to be hardcore. So that's going to increase. But there are other things, I mean, the relative barbarity of things like the Inquisition are not things that I think you can sweep under the rug.
Oh no, he doesn't.
The Bible.
I mean that's the thing. The book doesn't say, you know, man, this is, you know, look at Christianity, wasn't it great? I mean, it deals with all of these things, but what it said, what he basically brings out is that running through this whole thing, there has been this constant philosophical churn, and it always comes back to this universalism. And of course, the universalists very often lose. So there was a period a few hundred years after the foundation of Christianity, before it became the official religion of Rome. But then again, afterwards as well, I think there was like an intensive period of like feminist Christianity, where people were saying, well, hang on, you know, women, I mean, they've got souls just like men. So why the fuck is it that they are subordinated in society? Surely they should be the same. And this was like, you know, that was a cutting edge Christian tenet for a while. And then, of course, it got squashed because obviously vested interests come in and so forth. So it's not a paean to Christianity. It's just an acknowledgement of the force of it culturally, and how many, you know, things that we would consider to be social goods it's brought to us.
But I question the claim regarding some of those goods. For example, Christians being more charitable. From what I've read, Christians are more charitable when someone is watching. If you give somebody a choice between charity work, cleaning a ravine versus working in a soup kitchen, Christians are going to be more likely to choose working in the soup kitchen because this is where everybody will see them.
Yes, you'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, this is to some extent, this is just.
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
there's a reason why the people hustling, you know, the rose sellers in tourist destinations. There's a reason why they sort of zoom in on couples as opposed to individuals, right? You want to shame somebody to doing this, and that seems to be what it's all about. They did a study once where somebody made a passing reference to a ghost in a psychological test and found that reduced cheating exams on the test. Sticking a Gary Larson scribbled diagram.
I remember. I read that on your blog. Yeah,
these things are
because
essentially surveillance measures to try and control a society that cannot be, you know, once a society gets so big that everybody doesn't know everybody else. You need to invoke a supernatural power to keep people in line.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, I don't doubt that. I mean, it's all of these things, all, you know, religious systems and other social systems as well. They're all constructed on the bedrock of how human beings work psychologically. So yeah. But no, I just think, I mean, I'll read the book because I'm not advocating his
I
point of
will.
view.
Dominion, you say?
Dominion, Tom Holland, yeah. But
He's got another one while you're at it too.
Robert Charles Wilson. Wait a minute. I think we might even have this. Bug? Do we have Robert Charles Wilson's Owning the Unknown? Where have I seen that recently?
Well, he just came out with it recently. This is a copy that Kevin got from Charles, from Robert.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that sounds. I mean, I'm still sort of plowing through the Book of the New Sun, so it'll be a while before I get to it.
You would like, I think you would like that book, Peter, Owning the Unknown, Robert
And
Charles
Richard,
Wilson.
you as
I'm a
well.
fan. I'm a fan of the man's fiction for
piqued my
sure.
curiosity now. Yeah.
Yeah, he wrote Spin, which I think would be just a real one of my favorites. I think.
Yeah,
He was a
yeah. No, I
huge
just
Hugo
actually
winner.
just read that a few months ago.
Mhm.
Did
Yeah,
you enjoy it?
I really did.
Tricky.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
tricky because that there is this problem, right? We can see that certain beliefs and behaviors are cohesive, right? And therefore potentially desirable. At the same time, if you can see that they are built on bullshit in terms of the, you know, what's actually believed, then you're in this bind, aren't you? And I mean, you do find it's interesting with a lot of the neoliberal philosophers, the early guys like Hayek, and you know, before the people that the Chicago School took and used as their philosophical building blocks. And what you find there, interestingly enough, Hayek's a big fan of religion. He's not religious; he's an atheist himself, but he thinks other people should be religious. And this is the problem, isn't it? That you're if you are an atheist, you're stuck because you're like, yeah, I can see how this is useful, but at the same time, it's built on a lie. What do you do about that? And I can remember getting into a long argument with what's the Canadian? Oh God, what the guy who wrote Prince of Nowhere? Can't remember his name now.
Scott Baker.
Scott Baker, yes, Scott Baker. So I
My wife
remember
is a friend of his.
Well, yeah, no, he's. I mean, I got into this long discussion with him, and he was talking about the sort of, you know, the way we perceive the world as opposed to the way the world is. He was obsessed with that. You know, and he was, and I was saying, yeah, but I think unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, you have to take an as if approach to life. You know. You can't be constantly peeling back and looking behind because you'll never get anything done. And you have to, you know, you go with certain precepts that work for you. And he was really upset because he was saying, oh, but that's like pretending that my wife loves me when she's fucking every guy on the block. And yeah, you know, he was getting
really had some issues.
yeah, I think so. But yeah, I think there is this really tricky thing where you're like, well, you know, because if you're prepared to follow it to its end, we all die, right? So I can have kids, right? I've got my son, he's 13 now. I've invested the last decade and a bit of my life in him. He's the core of my life these days. Do anything for him, you know, quite literally leap in front of a bullet for him. But I know he'll be dead in less than 100 years, you know. So there is this. Unfortunately, knowing is a kind of rot, and so you're faced with you either take the portrait by Goya approach, which is how I resolve it. You know, yeah, it's beautiful painting and it's only canvas, oil on canvas, but so fucking what? It's beautiful painting. Or yeah, you lie to yourself, I suppose. That's the alternative. And most humans seem a lot happier lying to themselves than they are with the painting metaphor.
Dharmic religions seem to be, and I'm no expert on them, but they seem to be a lot more consistent with what we know about how the brain works, the absence of the self.
Yeah, that was one of the things I loved about echopraxia was where you firmly install the reader in the brain of this very skeptical, hard-boiled atheist scientist, and then when he gets in an argument with the woman from what are they called, the conglomerate,
the bicamerals.
And she just starts unloading all this shit about you know, Hindu thought and Buddhist thought and all these ideas that are now appear to have a pretty sharp grasp on what things are like. And it was really disruptive. I liked that a lot. But
There is, which you may have heard of, there's a movement afoot to create essentially a religion for atheists.
uh-huh.
I think shit, the guy, Sam somebody.
Oh,
got a
not Sam
popular-
Harris. That's Sam Harris.
Yeah. I believe he's one of the exemplars of this. It's like the idea of we recognize that religious ritual
Has value. Yeah.
has a lot
Community
of
has
has a lot of positive impacts, that there are macro structural changes, observable structures to the brain that result that you can find in people who are chronic meditators. You get enhanced wiring between various associative parts of the brain and so on. The details elude me, but the point was, yeah, there is a lot of adaptive and good stuff in the practices of religion, in the rituals of religion. And there seems to be a movement afoot now to try and sort of culturally appropriate that shit
Yeah.
and move
Well,
it
I
into
went to
move it into a system which is divorces it from the spiritual and supernatural beliefs, but retains the positive ritualistic
Yeah,
elements.
I mean, I went to a funeral, but my uncle of mine died a little while ago, and I went to his funeral a couple of weeks ago, and it was a humanist ceremony, and that was exactly what it was. Basically, it had taken the hollowed out shell of a standard Christian funeral, and then it had just basically come along and given it these humanist touches. So there's no mention of an afterlife. There's no mention of God. Although they did at the end, they did sort of, what did he say? He more or less sort of said, "Oh, and if you're religious, this bit's for you." And there was like a little, kind of allowance. Go into the smoking room and be religious. But yeah, again, this humanist celebrants, they're called, the people who will do your funeral for you on behalf of Humanist Society UK. I've got a network of these people, and they're basically like vicars. You call them round, they come round, they talk to you about the deceased, they ask what kind of ceremony you'd like, blah 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 blah. So yeah, and I have to say, this one, my uncle's funeral, it really was good. It was a good one, if such a thing can be said. It was a moving ceremony. I feel everybody got it out of their system. It worked. So yes, I think there's a good argument for that. I think, accepting that we're not. It's the protein pill fallacy, isn't it? It's this golden age idea that we'll live in this world where everything will be shiny silver and we'll eat protein pills. And it's like, no, it won't be that. You've got to accept that we are physical, we are biological, we're wired in certain ways. You have to accept the impact of the numinous, even if you don't accept that the numinous is an actual physical part of reality. And then there's fucking quantum physics as well, because I mean, I could a little sneak preview of the new book. There's magic in this book, right? And this guy's talking about why all this magic all of a sudden, and he invokes quantum physics because he says, have you heard these guys, Niels Bohr, and he names a couple of early quantum guys, and he starts going on about how they've discovered that in fact the world we think we know doesn't exist, and there's another world behind it. And of course, that's perceived in magical terms by the by the characters in the book, because it's 1923 and they can't do anything else. And he's missed the catch. That's the point of it. For anyone who reads it who knows anything about quantum physics is going to have a chuckle over that. But again, I can't help thinking, quantum fucking. I mean, seriously, have you read, Peter? You'll know. Have you read, what's his name, Max Tegmark's thing, The Mathematical Universe?
I've read some of his shorter stuff. I haven't read that book, no.
Yeah, fucking hell. I mean, I was actually quite pleased I'd keep up with him, but he basically proves you don't exist and then says, but actually maybe you do. And it's mind-blowing, the shit that he feeds into. There's the many worlds hypothesis, there's the multiverse level 1, multiverse level 2, multiverse level 3, multiverse level
Jesus.
4.
Justin, do you have is there anybody whose books you do not have?
Hey, there you go. Yeah. The only thing is about Tegmark is the write-up on the book I had, The Mathematical Universe, is called He says that he is a rock star cosmologist or something. And I do think there is a bit of the rock star about him, in the sense that he's given to these grandiose gestures. Very good at a populist level. He's very good at conveying very complex data to you if you don't have much in the way of math.
He reminds me a bit of Lee Smolin, who I think we've talked to about before, Peter. But Lee Smolin, only Max Tegmark communicates it so well.
Yeah, well, that's what but I mean, it is what you need, especially with something like quantum, because you just it makes no sense. And although I do feel it's interesting, I don't know if it's because it's where he seems to have left it in that book, which admittedly is now about 25 years old. I think it was published in the late 90s, or maybe early 2000s. But I do get the impression that cosmologists are in the fucking swamp at the moment, that they're increasingly turning up results they just can't, fit into the available theories. And and the what's it, the Hubble telescope keeps delivering stuff, and they're like, oh Jesus Christ, that doesn't make any sense at all.
James Webb. Hubble's passé. It's James Webb.
It's the Webb part. Yes, you're right. It's the Webb. And yes, you get the distinct impression that things are falling apart now in the same way Newtonian physics did in 100 years ago, when quantum physics suddenly started to become the thing.
I get the sense that Hawking, before Hawking died, he was actually starting to come around to Lee Smolin's version of cosmology.
Which is what? I haven't read him.
It's quantum gravity related, right?
Yeah, I think that may be more of his wife, his ex-wife. But it's, his idea is that time is real. Like the whole idea of the current model is kind of a block universe, right?
Yeah. Where
all physics equations are time symmetric. You have to invoke entropy to come up with an arrow of time, and essentially we're a bunch of threads going through a block in amber, right?
Right.
And that time is basically an illusion. And this does violence with common sense, but it seems to fit all the equations. And Smolin's always argued that this is essentially confusing the maps with the territory, that we have these equations, we build these graphs, and because those things are static, they tend to lead us, many of the experiments that we do have to assume that there are externalities involved, because you cannot include all the variables in the universe whenever you perform an experiment. But that these things do not map well onto models of cosmology, because by definition, there's nothing outside, there are no externalities in the universe. Anyhow, his basic conclusion is, because I'm nowhere near smart enough to follow the guy, his basic conclusion is that time is real, and that space is an emergent property of time rather than the other way around.
Oh shit.
And he comes up with, and it also his a corollary of this is almost like something out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's that the laws of physics are probabilistic.
Well, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, it's that when they start off. I mean, and this is something that you've probably heard from any variety of sort of pop physics courses, right? That the laws of physics congeal in the first few microseconds after the Big Bang.
Yeah.
That there was no reason for the cosmological constant to be what it was. There was no reason for the strong nuclear force to be the exact amount that it was. That these are the things that kind of congealed after the Big Bang, sort of post beginning of universe. And Smolin's take on this is essentially that the universe rolls dice every time something happens. And the more frequently something happens, the more probabilistically, it's almost like programming a neural net by weighting the connections through repetition. And
right, so the laws emerge as the
apologies to all the people who understand Smolin and probably think that I'm fucking it up, because I probably am, but this is what I took from his popular science book, and it's been years since I read it. But that essentially, as the universe ages, those neural net type connections become so strong that we interpret them as physical laws. And it's kind of like the infinite improbability drive. That there is nothing in physics that says that a missile cannot turn into a sperm whale or a pot of petunias. It's just extremely unlikely.
Yeah, right.
And so that because the universe is now several billions of, oh, fuck off. Tristan, Do you
Well, you
read all
get
these things?
balloons
They're
again.
all hardcovers too. They're all, or no, that was a paperback, but it's there. They all look very, very clean. Anyway, I haven't read that one. I read his other thing, Trouble with Time, or Time Reconsidered, or Time Reinvented, or something. But because the universe is now what 15 billion years old, the probabilities are basically carved in stone. So we see a completely deterministic set of classical Newtonian laws. I'm actually, one of the video games I'm working on, I've just suddenly realized I can use that.
Take notes.
Hang on, I just got to take a notice here.
This is why we do these interviews, just to make sure Peter's got some good ideas.
Well, we might have to. I certainly might have to get across to Canada because I keep meaning to have a holiday in Canada, and I don't know. Every time we get stymied by something, but
I don't know if I would. I don't know if I would recommend Toronto as the place to go, but it
No,
would
you
be
can
awesome
start
to
there,
see
can't
you.
you? You can
Sorry?
start there, though. You
Yeah,
can start
you
there,
can do
though.
that.
Yeah.
Sure.
No, I was because you can still get across the country on a train. I know it's a lot more complicated than it used to be, but I think you can still do it.
Yeah, it's
So
possible.
I was thinking about trying to do that. Although again, the problem now is because I had in mind, I finished the holiday in BC and Vancouver, but of course, there's a good chance that BC will be on fire by the time I go on holiday this summer.
Or there's a chance the flames will have burned out by then,
Well, yeah, okay, you pick
and
your
there won't be
moment.
anything left to burn.
Okay, now.
And you can get inspired by the science fiction post-apocalyptic landscape
The
that you will
smoking
pass through
ruins,
by
yeah.
using Via Rail. Yeah.
Ending on a high note there. Lots of optimism. Thank you for joining us once again. We very much appreciate you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Richard. That was awesome. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to join us again on the show. Until next time.